So good morning one and all. Today we are here to talk about asynchronous programming. And my name is Hemel Ruparel. I'm in final year diploma, uh, computer science. And let's start with the presentation. So a disclaimer that everything that we are going to do right now is an optimization. And if you don't have the specific problem, please don't do it. Premature optimization is the root of all evil. So with that, we start. So synchronous programming. So the programs that we build and execute so far are by default synchronous, which means that they only do one thing at a time. So for example, you cannot perform some calculations while you are waiting for some user input, or you cannot read a file from the hard disk while you are waiting for a network request to complete, right? So that's synchronous programming. And just I would like to point out that this is a conversation, so you feel free to ask questions. If you feel that I'm going too fast, please turn off your mics and let me know, because I won't be able to see your chats. And yeah, so asynchronous programming is the ability to execute multiple things at once. So for example, like I said, you can perform some calculations while you're waiting for some user input, or you can read a file from the disk while you're waiting for a network request to complete. That's asynchronous programming. Let's have a look at an example. So I have an Android emulator pulled up over here, and this is a small demo app that I created. It has two buttons, send request and test UI. So if we click on test UI, it shows a dialog box that the UI is working, right? And when we click on send request, it sends the network request on the main thread of the application, like we usually do, blocking the entire app. Let's see what happens when we click on send request. You can see that the animation is paused, and clicking on test UI no more works. And now we get a response back from the server saying demo server, right? This is because when we send the request on the main thread of the application, the Android had called our callback. So until and unless the callback returns, Android cannot do other things like process other events or refresh the user interface. That's why the animations were blocked and nothing else worked. So the app feels hanged. Now let's have a look at another app. This is again the same layout. Clicking on test UI still shows UI is working, but this time send request sends a request asynchronously. That is in the background, right? So when we click on send request, the animation completes, and clicking on test UI is still working. And now we get a response back from the server, and we show a dialog accordingly, right? That's asynchronous programming. We performed the network request in the background. Let's have a look at another example. Let's say, for example, that we are a social media company, and we have a database of our users, and we want to analyze how many of the users are active, right? So I created this dummy function, is user active, that takes in a user ID and sleeps for 200 milliseconds, and then just returns true. In the real world, you would want to connect to a database, perform some SQL query, and get the result from there. But for the demonstration purposes, I just slept for 200 milliseconds to demonstrate the lag, the lag it takes to connect to the database and get the response back, right? And we are closing the function. And for our sample data, because we don't have any database, and I don't want to get into the complications of that, I'm just using a vector of ints. I'm calling it user IDs, and it has the size of 100, and all the user IDs are initialized to 1. So this is a vector constructor that takes in the size and the thing that you want and the value that you want to initialize each object to. In this case, 1. Right? And this is the naive implementation. We have a function synchronous, and we have a vector of ints, and we are calling it user IDs. And this is a for each loop. Anyone here not familiar with for each? Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
I assume everyone is familiar with for each. Basically, we loop over each element of the loop. So for each int ID in user IDs, we are just printing the value of is user ID, and we are printing a space along with it. And these are the closing braces, right? Let's have a look at the output. Okay, So I've already compiled the program and I will time this command. So time is a command that basically times the amount. It's like a stopwatch. It checks the amount of time it took for your program to execute. And I'll pass it the synchronous function to execute. And this is we get no output till now because SED out is buffered, so it won't print the output until the buffer is full or the program exits. That's why there's no output over here. Let's wait for this to complete. Yeah, so we can see it took about 20 milliseconds and 20 seconds and 12 milliseconds, and we only used about 5 milliseconds to do actual real work. Can anyone suggest how we can improve the performance of this code? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Just create a new thread for each request. Maybe.
Yes. Let's try creating a new thread for each request. So this is the threaded implementation. So this function I'm calling threads again takes in a vector of user IDs, and I'm storing the size of the user IDs in the size variable, and I've created a vector of threads, and the size of the vector is the size that we get in the input. And I'm looping over from 0 to size, and I'm storing the variable ID in user ID that I in a variable ID. And this is because in the lambda in the next line, I don't want to copy the entire user IDs vector because I am only interested in one particular ID, right? So this is a lambda. I've created a lambda called work, and it copies ID into itself. And when executed, it just prints if the user is active along with a space. And in the next line, I'm doing two things: creating a thread and assigning the threads that I to the thread that I just created. So in std thread, if you create a thread with a particular function, it starts a new thread and it creates a new thread and starts executing it in the background. And next, we again have another for loop from 0 to size, and we are calling thread.join. So C++11 does not have joinable threads. It's there in C++20 called std_thread, which upon destruction automatically joins itself. But in C++11, we have to call join so that we are waiting for the thread to complete. And in this case, we are just looping. We are just waiting for all the threads to complete so that we can continue our program. And when all the threads are completed, we are just printing an end line on the screen. So let's time that out. So if I time a.out threads, so you can see it took about 200 milliseconds, and we were using most of our time because it takes 200 milliseconds for a request to complete. We have basically utilized our hardware to almost 100% resource utilization. Let's continue. And we get 100x speed up because if you see 20 seconds is 20,000 milliseconds, which divided by 200 is like 100x speed up. But what if instead of just printing something on the screen, we have to get the result and do something with the result, right? Now this is where the thread pain point of threads start, because threads were not designed to do inter-thread communication. Does anyone know the history of threads? Okay, so there's this video by Computerphile, threading code, multi-threading code. I cannot play this here because it will get a copyright strike, but you can check this video out. The basic TLDR of this video, the first 4 minutes of this video is, before threads, what people used to do to gain more processor time, what they used to do, yes, I'll send the link. Yeah. So what they used to do was they used to fork a process. Unix has a system called fork. What it does is it creates a separate process which with the same operating system data structure that represents the process, except that the copied process can do other things, and the copied process itself is an independent process, and so it can do other things. and the process which called fork can again go on doing other things. But then they realized that the only difference between the data structure representing the first process, which called fork, and the fork process was that they had different instruction pointers, meaning they were executing different instructions at the same time. They realized that what they could create a lightweight process called a thread, which shared the same memory as the original process, and it shared all the data structures so far as the operating system was concerned. But they could have different instruction pointers, so they could be executing different things at the same time. So that was threads, and they were not designed to do inter-thread communication. So there are two basic ways to do inter-thread communication. First is shared memory. This is you have something that is shared between both of those threads. So you have to take care about locking mutexes, lock guards, and whatnot. Or you can use a message passing, which is you can create sockets and the threads can communicate over the sockets, but which again is cumbersome and verbose. In this case, we are only looking at shared memory using locking. So this is the second function, threads2. In this case, the return type is vector of bool because that's our result. And we are still taking in user IDs, and vector of threads and size is again the same. But this time we have a vector of bool, that is the result. And it has the same size as size. And we have an std mutex. And anyone here familiar with std mutex? Or not
Yes.
familiar with std mutex? Yeah, Shekhar?
Yes, mutex is basically it locks it acquires the lock and it completes the critical section and it will unlock it actually basically. Like it's like halts the whichever thread gets the lock and goes the executing the code and then rest will wait for acquiring the lock actually. It's
Yes.
primitive for
This thread synchronization. Mutex, just for the sake of this presentation, the person there can only be one mutex. It's not copyable, and the thread holding the mutex is basically a synchronization primitive. So it stands for mutually exclusive. So there can only be one thread holding a mutex at any given time. That is guaranteed by the hardware and the thread. Sorry, operating system, not the thread. So again, we have this for loop, but this time I'm using lock guard to ensure that the mutex is released when the destructor of the guard calls. Anyone not familiar with lock guards? Okay. So anyway, lock guard basically just okay. You are not familiar. Okay. Basically, what a lock guard does is it takes in a mutex and it upon creation it locks the mutex, and when it destroys, it releases the mutex. So it's basically an RAII wrapper around the std mutex. So I've created an std lock guard and it takes in a template parameter. I'm giving std mutex and I'm calling it guard and I'm giving it the particular mutex. And one thing to note, the mutex is passed by reference here in the lambda because the mutex is not copied. And then I'm assigning the result of I to be the is user active of ID. And what else we have? And in the end, I'm returning the result because this time we don't have void. We are not printing anything. We are returning the result. So let's execute out threads 2. You can see this is already slow and it almost looks like it's synchronous code. Let's wait for this to complete. Does anyone have any questions so far? Is there something I overlooked or something that I went too fast? No one? Okay, fine. Yeah, so we are taking about 20 milliseconds, 20 seconds, 18 milliseconds, and we are we are not doing anything most of the time in the user space, and we are using 13 milliseconds of the kernel space. That's interesting because a synchronous program executed for about 12 milliseconds. So we are actually slower than a synchronous program. Now that's weird. Can anyone tell me what mistake we did?
Basically, like we are creating mutex here actually, and basically blocking the others to execute.
Yes. The reason being, we are calling isUserActive function after acquiring the mutex. So we are basically threads behind us. So what can we do to solve this? Shekhar gave the answer. You would like to try?
Yeah, basically like in this instead of mutex, and which is like logged primitive, and we can try unlocked primitive, which is coroutine maybe, which is maybe is not.
No.
Uh,
The problem is not that we are locking
The problem is, I think you're doing all the work inside the lock. Your critical section is doing the work
Yes.
as well as the update of the data structure.
I
Perhaps
think
the
we can,
intention is to have the lock for the data structure only.
yes, I think we can use Nemo4 here.
So Vishal mentioned in the comments that we are storing the we can just store the result after executing the function. We can store the result somewhere else, and then we can lock. Then we can acquire the lock, and only when we want to update the result. So that's what we are going to do. So this is the updated work function. We are storing the result of the isUserActive function inside a boolean, and I'm calling this isActive. And then I want to update the result. That is when I'm acquiring a lock, again the same lock guard, and then I'm storing the result. I'm updating the result to prevent race conditions, and I'm storing the result in the vector basically, and then moving on. So, and on top of that, we can do other silly mistakes like forgetting to take result by reference. So in this particular lambda, this is exactly the same function as before. But I have made one silly mistake over here. I have forgotten to pass result by reference. Now, this is the kind of mistakes that your static analyzer won't catch, that your compiler won't catch, because this is legal code, right? But we are not, upon execution, this won't do what we expect it to do because we are changing the local copy of the result, not the result itself. So you can see how these threads are breaking down quickly, right? We can do silly mistakes, we can forget to lock, etc. So what if I told you that you don't need to manage your own threads, that there are libraries which will do that for you? So there's some conventional terminology. Asynchronous operation and futures and promises. Futures are also called promises in most languages. You have either futures or promises, but the C++ committee was like, either futures or promises is for noobs. We have them both. So C++ has both futures and promises. So asynchronous operation is an operation that happens in some other thread in background. Future is a value that we get back from an asynchronous operation. The value may be a result or an error, either or. So for example, if your asynchronous operation throw, then then getting the value from the future will throw itself, the same exception. And a promise is an object that sets up the future. A promise is not related. A promise is not relevant for this talk. The only reason it is mentioned is because it sets up the future. And before touching the libraries, the standard also provides us with some tools that are available in C++ 11. So std async is a function that represents asynchronous operation. It creates the threads for us, and it sets up the it returns a future, and it manages the promises by itself. That's why I told the promises is not relevant for this talk. So std future is a data structure that represents the future. Std promise is an object that sets up the future, and it is managed by std async for us. So we'll not get into the details. So this time, instead of vector of threads, we have a vector of bool. Now std future is templatized on the return value of the promise. So in this case, we want a boolean result. So we are storing a vector of future bool. and we are calling it futures, and it has the same size as size. We are again having a result. Actually, there is a mistake. The result should have a constructor parameter of size. I update the PPT, and in this case, STD async has two main overloads. One is it takes in a function and the arguments, and it forwards those arguments. But the problem with that overload of the STD async function is that it's not guaranteed that the function will be called in a separate thread. So the standard has something called a launch policy, and the launch policy is how STD async decide whether to create a separate thread or not. So the default launch policy is either async or deferred. Deferred means executes on the same thread, but when we want the value out of the future, it will block. And it also has another overload where we specify the exact launch policy we want. So here we are giving it the launch policy of STD async, STD launch async, which means that I want this function to be executed in some other thread. And STD is, so that's the first parameter. The second parameter is the function that we want to execute. And in our case, we want to execute is user active. And the rest of the parameters are arguments that are forwarded to the function. So so you can already see that we don't need any kind of threads or mutexes or locks in this example. And again, in the second for loop, we are looping from 0 to size, and we are storing the result using .get. If your operation throws in the STD async, then .get will also throw. So if you have an operation that might throw, be sure to surround the future with a try catch. Here what we are doing is we are calling the future.get. Now the get method will again block. It will block till the result is available, and when the result is available, it will continue execution. So we are just storing the result in result time. Now let's time this function. So I think I called it async, right? Yes, I called it async. So async. You can see it took about 209 milliseconds. So it's within the margin of error. It's almost as fast as writing the thread code by hand. And we are returning the result over here. So it works just the same because the async just wrapped our threads. Yeah.
Just on the previous slide.
Sure.
What you're showing here is async will spawn a thread by itself internally.
Yeah.
And you're passing the function is user active. So that's the function that the thread will execute. It's a work of the thread.
Yeah.
And it will, so any parameters that you pass on after that. So that ID is a parameter to this function is user active. And what you get back is a future. So the function returns an int. So you get back a future int. So it will come sometime in the future. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why you're doing a get afterwards. And when you call the get in the next loop, it will block the current thread till you have the value ready from the thread.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
STD async is a variadic template. So anything after, optionally, anything after you enter the first function, the name of the function, it will just forward it to the function that is going to execute. So you can have any parameters, any number of parameters, it won't matter. But the important point, as Ankur mentioned, is you don't get the result. You get a future of the result. And that's exactly, and calling get again, when we want the result, we will call get. I hope STD future has something to check if the result is available or not. I'm not exactly sure, but I'll check.
Yeah, it knows whether the result is already ready or not. And then it blocks if it is not ready.
Hi, I have one question here.
Sure.
Actually, yeah, I miss there are some advantages over thread and for async both. Like here we can have some return type, but in thread you cannot have. But can you tell exact the difference when we have to use STD thread and async? Because basically it's like both are async also internally using thread, and both are like having separate thing. It is working, but they have some advantage and disadvantage, and the thing is, I mean, it's not clear for me, like when to use what. So can you just tell if you are aware?
We get back to when to use asynchronous programming. I have those slides, but in general, STD async is a very lightweight wrapper around STD thread. And the problem with STD async, in my opinion, is by default is that if you don't give this STD launch async parameter, then the function might be executed on the same thread that you called STD async on.
Yes. Let's take a case. We are going with async only. So it will create separate thread. And other way, we have STD thread instead of using this feature concepts. So if that is a requirement, then we have to use what? Because same you can do with STD thread also. Apart from that return type, so I think here for STD async also there are some disadvantage. But I'm not sure actually when we have to use STD thread and when we have to use STD async.
My answer will be it won't matter as much if you use STD async, because it is a very lightweight wrapper that will just fetch a thread from an internal thread pool and execute it. But it's implementation defined. So I don't think it will matter much if you use STD async or STD thread, except that if sometimes you want one and only one result from a thread, then using the API of the future is much better and much more readable in my opinion. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I thought there are certain cases where we have to go for async and thread.
I would like to add. Yeah, I would like to add here. The reason, so since async is also launching a thread, it is equivalent to you yourself launching a thread without having to do all the management, which is the point Hemil is clearly making here. Why do the work when somebody's already done it in a standard way and we know it is not going to fail? You might prefer the thread over async in case you are managing the thread for more than one thing. So async will launch the thread for the one action which you gave to it and execute and finish that, and the thread will go away. If you can afford lots of threads spawning and exiting in your application repeatedly, then async and thread would be equivalent for you. But if you keep the threads a little longer and do more than just one activity, then you have then you might prefer the threads. The other aspect is since a function is passed, it is very clean what you are passing to the threads to the async API, since a function and its parameters are passed. But when you do a thread kind of a thing, you can share the entire program space, the global space, and you can do some sharing. And if you have more than just this task, and if you want to update some data structures, use some connections, you can do that. So that is these are the considerations that you can have in order to decide whether to choose thread or async. You can go further, like you can have a pool of threads and keep on giving jobs. It just keeps on getting better. So there are many other alternatives also. I don't think we have thread pool being discussed in this session. So I guess you can have a thread pool or an executor set where you can give it tasks. So we leave it at that. I guess it depends on how much you want to do and whether you can afford a thread being spawned for every job that you want to do, every task that you want to do.
And something I would like to chip in is sometimes you have a situation whereby you want to time, just think of, you want to do an HTTP request, for example. You don't want, and sometimes the network may be good, in which when you make a request, it goes through. Sometimes the network may be so bad in such a way that when you make a request, it times out. You want to set a timeout on the number of seconds that your request must take. So for a thread, you need some synchronization primitives in order to set a timeout on your request. But using a future, you can set a timeout on the future itself. When it times out, you can check the status of the future to make sure if the result is ready or otherwise. This is one of the cases where I sometimes use futures on promises, where threads sometimes may not come into play. I mean, thread obviously have their uses, but future have some specific usage. So I I could share an example code where, just like I said earlier, you make requests. If it times out, you can check the status of the future to make sure if you've gotten your result or it times out. So yeah, that's just one of the cases I think futures can be useful, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you.
The rule of
Plus,
thumb
just
that I
one
follow-
small point I will remember. I will remind you guys from the first thread example. Emil presented that you have to join the threads. You can't just let them destruct. So you have all those manual things that you have to manually take care of. The synchronization primitives, which Ogyumka also said. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Yeah, so I was going to say that my rule of thumb is if I want ping pong communication between the threads, then I want to manage my own threads or use an executor. If I just want to spawn a thread to do something in the background, just get me a result on an error, I will use futures because that's more straightforward. Okay, we have a couple of comments that I should check. Yeah, because Vishal had mentioned a couple of comments. So the question is how many? Okay, let me go back. Storing the result outside log. Okay, yeah, this is one. You can set a timeout. Yes, you mentioned. Ogyunika, can you unmute and say how we can pronounce your name?
My name is Joshua, actually. Joshua.
That's much better.
Okay.
Yeah. Joshua, as Joshua mentioned, you can set a timeout on the future, and Vishal Sharma mentioned that you can use a thread tool. Actually, STD async is actually implementation defined, so your particular implementation may internally use a thread tool. So that's there. And yeah, the value is lost if you pass the STD thread. You cannot get back a return value without future promises or some kind of thread. And more of, okay, I don't know how to pronounce this name, but the question is how many threads can you want for the set of class? Yes, hardware concurrency. Hardware concurrency can give you a hint as to how many threads might be there on the system. It's not a foolproof on this thing, but yeah. As Joshua mentioned, we can set a timer. Okay, yeah. Result has a wait for as well as a wait until, which you can use to make timeouts, etc. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So let's move on.
Emil, I have one question here actually, just to regarding number of threads we have spawned actually. Like when we spawn the threads, when we see the example of a thread primitive, STD thread primitive using, and we know how many threads we spawn, but when it comes to async, like how can we know how many actual threads are running actually? Is this like, can we know somehow that how many, you said like sometimes in the same thread the work is done actually, like how can someone know like how many threads are actively running at the moment?
I think you would need operating system level features that you, if your operating system has an API, C API that would provide, then you can call that. The problem, the thing about asynchronous programming is implementation details vary widely. So you can have asynchronous programming on single threaded. For example, the app I showed you was 100% single thread. But what it did was it waited for the future to complete. I didn't show the code because it was not C++. But the point being that asynchronous programming is not related to threads. What asynchronous programming does is it abstracts away the concept of the thread. So you don't have to manage the thread. You can just be like, this is the task I want to be done in the background. Go do it. That's asynchronous programming.
Yeah, I agree in some use cases if you take, and there will be also async will taking a much time actually. So because having said it is spanning much many threads, but I as a developer I should know that like which is the best primitive for me for particular scenario, and there should be way I guess, and maybe Ankur comment on it actually, knowing. And
if you have that specific use case, you are probably using some kind of library to manage your thread pool, and you have to refer to that specific library's API documentation to allow you, and that might allow you to set the library to use a particular number of threads, or the library might give you an API to query the number of threads executed. But the main, benchmarking might help, as Vishal pointed. But the main thing about asynchronous programming is I have, and I will show some libraries in the example. What these libraries usually do is they spawn the number of threads as are available in the hardware. For example, this system is a 4-core system. So when we run a program that is compiled along with this hardware, it will spawn 4 threads and then a bunch of IO threads. So what it will do is the IO operation will be performed on the IO thread so that the main threads are free for any kind of mathematical number crunching operations that you want, or any kind of CPU heavy operation for that matter. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I think if I'm not understood wrongly, actually, like, does this async primitive knows the hardware which is running actually? I mean, like, does
It is an extremely lightweight. Async is very easy to implement. You just you check, you create a thread, you give it a function to execute, you forward all the arguments, and when the thread and when the function executes, whatever is the return value is the value. You create a promise containing the return value, and then you set the future that you notify the future that this operation is complete. Here's the value. That's all that async does. Async is extremely low.
okay? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emil.
Okay. There's a comment by Joshua. It is noteworthy to mention that the implementation of async programming in standard way is one way to do things, and there are other implementations. Yes, Qt, Boost ACO, extremely different. Yeah, they have an extremely event-driven. I have seen a talk at CPPCon. I don't remember the name, but Get Rich Quick by I don't know the author of the talk. It was about Boost ACO, Boost Beast actually, which builds upon Boost ACO. And the examples that I saw were extremely event-driven. So when you get a request, execute this piece of code. And when you actually, let me just do a quick YouTube. Get Rich Quick.
Was it Vinny Falco?
Yeah, Vinny Falco. So you can have a look at this talk. CPPCon 2018, Vinny Falco, Get Rich Quick, Boost Beast, WebSockets and Networking. Yes, extremely long title. You can have a look at that for Boost ACO. Boost Beast actually. Yeah. So let's move on. But the premise of asynchronous programming is we don't want to manage our own threads, because we are humans. We make mistakes, and thread breaks down pretty quickly. So what if I told you you don't need to manage your own threads? Like there needs to be libraries to do it, right? So okay, wait. I have done this part. Sorry, my bad. So here we were calling get to return the value, and we are storing the value in the result, and we are returning the result. Did I show you async? Okay, let's look at the terminal. Yeah, I showed you async code. That's where we were. Sorry. Yeah, so this is, I was going to come back to this point. We don't have infinite threads. Like for every task that we want to perform in the background, we cannot create a new threads, because not only each thread has its own stack, so you are using memory. Each thread needs a space in the operating system. The operating system needs a data structure to represent the thread. Plus the more threads you have, the slower the scheduler will run, because at the kernel level, the kernel wants to give each thread a fair chance to execute. And so you cannot have infinite number of threads. Not only will you run out of memory, but all your programs will be slowed down, because the scheduler is taking more and more time, giving more and more chance to more and more threads. So we need a way to manage those threads. So so what's the solution to this, right? So we need to divide the program into self-contained tasks. And for example, as in the Boost Beast Get Rich Quick, this one, what he does is he has it's an event-driven programming. So what you do is, when you get a request for this at this particular URL, execute this piece of lambda, right? And the lambda is self-contained. So when I execute that particular lambda, I don't care. It does not have any external state. No external references and such. When I execute it, it's a function, it just executes. So that's self-contained tasks. And then we can schedule those available tasks on the available threads. And for input output, we can use the kernel to notify us when some input output is complete. Okay, Samnam has an okay. In case a method gets into the deadlock, it has and it has been called into async. Then yes, yes. I am not sure about how we will handle deadlocks in STD future. If someone can point out, that will be great. I'm not sure about that. Sorry, Sam.
No, I don't think you can detach the thread.
I don't. Yeah.
Because you don't have any handle to the thread. You just have the future. So I guess if you let the future destruct
Actually,
the necessary cleanup.
You can have wait. You can use wait for and wait until, and you can set a ridiculous amount of what you say. You can set a ridiculous timeout. So if it exceeds that particular timeout, then you can always if it exceeds the timeout, then you can cancel that operation using the future. So future has wait for and wait until, and wait for which takes in a timeout, and after that it will just return with the status failure. So that you can use. And deadlock is in general a problem. So there are thread sanitizers available that you can use. And so you will have to use some kind of static or dynamic thread analyzers that will analyze your program and let you know of the deadlock. So there's that. And Linux, so I was on kernel level input output. So Linux has support for asynchronous IO. I am not sure about yes, but thanks timeout will help. Yeah, sure. Linux has support for asynchronous IO. I'm not sure about Windows, but if we want to be truly asynchronous, we need kernel level support. There's no way around. Yeah. To be honest, I've never used async. It was always for tasks that is embarrassingly parallel as opposed to tasks that had come from somewhere. Yeah, true. So there are two well-known, actually this should have been libraries, but anyway. So there are two well-known frameworks, C-Star and Rogon. C-Star is actually a general purpose framework. It was developed by a company called Scylla, and they are selling a high performance NoSQL database that is compatible with Apache Cassandra. And Apache is written, Cassandra is written in Java, and this is written in C++. So what these guys did is they open source their framework. But the problem with C-Star is it does not have that much documentation available to it. So the documentation is extremely lagging. Okay. So async isn't, yeah. Async is not a silver bullet. Async is no silver bullet. So the advantage of C-Star is that it is extremely general. So what it does is you create a bunch of tasks, and C-Star has a task scheduler internally which schedules those tasks, and you can assign priorities and you can do all sorts of stuff. And there's another one called Rogon. Rogon is not an asynchronous programming library per se. It's an HTTP web framework. But what it does is it provides asynchronous wrappers of database drivers. So it gives you callbacks to execute SQL asynchronously in some background IO thread. So this is the example where this framework is not exactly asynchronous, but it has a bunch of IO threads, and it runs as many main threads as the number of cores available in your system to handle all possible requests. And the last I saw, this was the fastest performing framework of all the languages of all the libraries. It had around 650 million requests per second or something, 650,000 or something like that. But let's continue. So I am more familiar with Rogon, so I'm going to give an example of that. And I forgot to mention, both C-Star and Rogon are open source frameworks. So I provide a link to both of them if you want. And so client pointer is a database client in this case, and we are asking it to execute some SQL async. Anyone familiar with SQL? No response?
Who isn't?
I am also.
Sure. So the SQL here is arbitrary, doesn't matter what you do. The basic point is we are querying a database and we are waiting for the result. So what Dragon does is instead of blocking the thread and giving us the result, it assigns this task to some other network IO thread, and it gives back a callback. So it takes a callback, which takes in some result. In this case, we are just processing some result, and we don't care what process does it, right? And it takes another callback, which is an exception. That's, let's say, for example, your SQL has a syntax error, then this lambda will get executed, and we get back the exception, and we are handling some error. Right? But we need to be careful with asynchronous programming, right? Because when we normally read code, we expect that line 1 executes before line 1 has already executed before line 2. But that's not always the case with asynchronous programming. Let's have a look at this example. You don't need to know SQL, but we are creating a temporary table. We are processing some result and then handling the error. And in the next line, we are using the temporary table we created over here. Now, Dragon makes no guarantees that this will execute before this. So you might get random errors and errors in your error callback because the temporary table might not always be there. So you need to be extremely careful with asynchronous programming. And if you want to do this correctly, the right way to do is to execute the second SQL statement inside the first function's callback. So here we are creating the temporary table, and we get back a result. We are processing some result, and then again, inside the callback itself, we are executing the second query. And then again, we are doing something with the result and handling the error. And is this clear to everyone, or am I moving too fast? Is everyone clear with this? Okay, Joshua says we are okay. Yeah, sure. But we can already see the pain points, right? We are having deep indentation. For example, if you look at this, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 level deep indentation only for executing 2 SQL queries, right? So we have deep indentation, and if you look carefully, we are duplicating the handling of error. So most of the time, if you have an error in your SQL query, what you will do is you will log the program and crash, because that's how SQL queries should never be. SQL statements should never fail. So we are duplicating this error handler everywhere. We can declare a macro, but that's upon you if it is a good idea or not. So that's the second pain point. We are duplicating the error handlers everywhere. So there are certain rules of thumb that I follow, and that is the function or the lambdas should be self-contained. That means there should be no references to outside scope. So means references in the sense ampersand references, L value references. And if the value is trivially copyable, I just copy it into callbacks. Int, float, double, doesn't matter. It will be stored in the register. You don't need to prematurely optimize that. The compiler will do that for you. If the value is not copyable, but only one callback needs it, then I move the value inside the callback, because that's the obvious thing to do. The first program the main thread doesn't need it. The callback needs it. So just move it in. No copy, it's fast. But if the value is not copyable or multiple callbacks needed, either case, I just create a state pointer and copy the state pointer around. So that increments the ref count and ensures that even all the lambdas have a valid pointer to the shared resource that I'm getting, and the resource is not destroyed until all the lambdas have been executed. So there's that. And when should we use asynchronous programming? When what we are doing is heavily IO bound. For the web server is a very good criteria for using asynchronous programming, because we don't want to block threads. We can increase our throughput multiple times. As we saw, we had 100x speed up just by spawning 100 threads. Now that's not always the best strategy to use, but threading can really help increase the throughput of your server, even if it adds a little bit of delay in the response of the request. And the second case is any kind of user interface program. That may be a website, that may be an app, that may be a desktop client, but any trivial such user interface will make requests to the background or load some file from the hard disk. And all those operations take time. So what we want to do is we want the main thread to be active so that it can keep responding to user events or show a progress indicator that it's doing something in the background, so the user doesn't feel that the app is hanged. Right? That's why we want to care about asynchronous programming. And when should we not use asynchronous programming? So when you are doing a CPU bound application, let's say for example you are performing some complex numerical calculations and you just want to split the load into multiple threads, so all your threads are doing calculations and you're using 100% of your CPU, that's when you should not use asynchronous programming, because it's not designed to do that. It's designed to do tasks in the background so that the main thread is not down, and when the infrastructure can handle the load. Now, in the example that we showed, in the example that I showed before, we were simulating a database query that checks if a user is active. So if we increase 100, if by using asynchronous programming in threads, if what we are increasing the amount of requests that a single machine can send to the database 100x just by using threads, right? So the network layer and the database both need to be capable enough to handle that amount of load, or they will break down, and that's not good, right? We want our infrastructure to remain stable. So if you are programming asynchronously, then you have to rethink your infrastructure in such a way that it can handle all your data throughput. And there are two main ways to implement asynchronous programming libraries, like not having to manually spawn those threads. First is using coroutine. So for those who don't know, coroutine is basically a function which we can suspend and then continue execution from where it was suspended. So what we can do is, for example, let's say we are making a database query. After making the database query, we can suspend, and then other functions can execute. And then when the database query is complete, then someone can notify us, and then we can continue the execution from where we left off. This is the best case. We don't have to deal with any kind of callbacks, no memory leaks, no locks, nothing. It's the 100% best case, and it's coming in C++20, so that's good. And the second is callbacks, like we saw in the Dragon example over here. Yeah. So what we can do is we can handle the scheduling of the threads to a background library, and the library will provide us callbacks that execute when something when a particular operation is complete. So that's the two ways you can implement libraries that do this. There are no coroutines libraries because, of course, it's just introduced, but there are a lot with callbacks. And all the examples compile in C++11, and I've checked this myself, except for this particular line in a bool is user active function, because I'm using chrono literals over here, 200 ms, and which is available only in C++14. And with that, I'm done, and we'll stop for questions.